Hello, everybody, and welcome to our new conversation in our Unionism Spiritual Discussion Group. We are shifting our focus from what has been Why Black Lives Matter into a much wider awareness of topical things happening around in the world. And the idea behind our conversation is to start seeking harmony in all those places. Hence the name of our new conversation being Seeking Harmony. So we are going to start unpacking what's happening in our world and looking at it at the core level, finding the truth in the situation. And so for today, as we start with our new conversation, I'd like to invite the team to just again introduce themselves, and then we will kick off from there. My name is Granville Campbell.
My name is Deborah Bassou.
My name is Jordan Marsan.
My name is Deji.
I'm Drake.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being here today. And so our topic for today is around what fuels the desire to take sides. And so we are going to have a very free-flowing conversation. And as we delve into the topic, please also feel free to share your thoughts and insights, and possibly even any experiences or even questions that you might have for the team that we could delve into. And so my part, I think, in getting to this topic, I think we've changed the format a little bit. So we are going to have a greater focus on just doing some research on what's happening in the world. And we thank Ray for taking up that role in terms of our topic research process for this conversation. And also, as we go deeper, please also feel free, if you have any questions, you feel something is topical that you'd like to highlight to the team that we can discuss in the upcoming weeks, please also feel free to do so. So I think one of the things that stood out for me as I was kind of feeling into this topic, and just as a general thing in life that I've experienced, I feel like the energy of taking sides is very much a tribal spiritual energy. And when I say that, why I say that is that we are descendants of tribes. And at the core, tribes very much focused on being with similar people. Tribes were formed out of being with like people. People that were not quite in the homogeneous group that a tribe was, were ostracized. They were punished for not supporting tribal tradition. Even in our socialization as kids, we play games where we choose sides. It's kind of something that happens in society. And I'm not certain that the lesson is contained only to the game. It feels to me like it very much spills over into other areas of our lives, creating the sense of being on opposite sides, not necessarily opposing, but the spill-off and the spin-off is that it does fuel the energy of taking sides. And so when I was feeling into it, I feel like that's kind of where that energy starts to ground. And that is those are the kind of the two places that really stood out for me in this energy of what is the root of taking sides. And so, I want to open that up to the team and see how they feel about that socialization of playing games on opposite sides, and how that may or may not have continued to fuel the energy of taking sides.
What came up for me is the consciousness of loyalty. Loyalty, that's what comes up for me, because when you brought up about, little kids playing games, when you think of a child and you know they're in the playground playing something like, what do kids play? Like, I don't know, dodgeball. Let's say dodgeball, for example. I don't know if that's still a thing. I'm 12 for there. So yeah, let's say dodgeball for a sec. Okay, when a kid is playing and the kids are all gathered up and they're picking sides, you likely want to be on the side where either your friend is there or or you're just going to be on the team where there's the best players and you know you're going to win. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about when it comes to taking sides. I don't know about anyone else.
Yeah, well, I was picking up was while Granville was introducing the topic was kind of like the social construct factor of picking sides or taking sides. Since we are social creatures, we tend to seek with whom we align so we can construct something bigger. Like a society is made out of, how do you say this? Conventions or agreements. And you tend to agree with those who kind of like think similar. The interesting thing happens is like what happens when you find the group that doesn't think like you. And that's where we are probably layer by layer get to the core of this topic. But that's what was being brought up for me. And I remember something that once Jeff told me in a coaching class that it was very interesting and I think could add a lot to this conversation, that a lot of times, even when people are communicating from a place of upset with another or a place of something that wasn't quite healed emotionally speaking, there's still some truth to what it's being said. And I feel like that would be the most interesting thing. Not so much so as to staying in the side that one picks, but kind of like allowing ourselves to be open and exploring whether the beliefs that we resonate within our chosen group are actually 100% true. And if that's something that we actually want to keep agreeing with or not. For me, this is kind of like the most interesting part of this topic.
For me, what came up personally when I thought about this topic was politics, because I grew up like very much watching the news and asking like, why do people take sides even when it feels like it's not like their personal view or like it would harm other people, for example. And then I got to university and I was in political science for a few years, and I still have contacts with people who are in political science. And so I'd say that I had a lot of conversations and questions also about how people view politics. And I realized that, for example, in my country, people very much view their political party as, I'd say it's kind of a biblical view, a very like, for republic is important. It's kind of like a religion for them, not in that sense of like preaching, or maybe, yeah, for some people, yes, actually. But, in believing and being very passionate about being in a political party. And sometimes the party does something that does not align with their view. But that's where the question came in. And then Deja talked about, the sense of belonging and loyalty. And I guess like people are loyal to sides, even though it's not something, either it's bad or wrong. I think they stay loyal to things like all their lives. And also there is that component of, on the other side, I don't see people that, you know, resemble me, or I don't think they would accept me. So yeah, I stay in the side where I know I could feel safe, or I know I could have like things to talk about, things to, you know, contribute, basically. I think people very much like to feel involved, and validated. And I think that's why sides usually like organize around a group, like the feeling of being in a group, part of something. And so yeah, that was my feeling about it. And obviously, like it goes beyond politics, but that was the thing that stood out to me.
Yes, I think all of you have touched on something quite important in the sense of the desire to belong. And you've all touched on it from different perspectives in terms of the sense of loyalty, the sense of shared beliefs, the sense of being involved. And I feel like, again, you know, like at the core, that desire to belong will probably lead us in the direction of choosing one group or another, or taking sides in support of one view or another. And so, like, I feel like there's the underlying energy that we grow up with is we don't necessarily question things at a deep level. We kind of constantly assume on certain personas as a result of the prevailing circumstances around us. So like what Deji was talking to around, you might want to be in a team with your mates or with people who are winning or that you believe to be winners. And it's that energy in society of win at all costs. And we have this kind of desire to align in those spaces. So like the undercore, for me, the underlying core energy of it is belonging and alignment in some way or another. So we might not support, as Yoreen said, everything that a political party stands for, but if we believe that we align to them in a certain way, or possibly even that they can give us something in a certain way, that's how we choose to fuel our belonging. That's how we choose to see our belonging. And so I think one of the very important lessons that we're learning through our journey and through the teachings of union and the teaching and Jeff and Shaleia's teachings are the energy of that belonging comes from inside. And so in belonging and I feel like it's that the energy of the core of your values. So like for me, it's very easy once I'm comfortable at the core of my values to make decisions about things that are not aligned and things that are aligned with me. And so therefore I can align with them. So I feel like that it's like we are learning to reverse that energy of looking for our belonging on the outside, which is probably going to give us a much more grounded view of what life is and what that energy of taking sides really looks like.
I want to talk about the idea of conflict, because it is very much part of that discussion. And I wonder what you guys think about it, but what I feel is that sometimes taking sides create a conflict, or nourishes the conflicts. Conflicts make them grow. But I think sometimes in the world that we live in, people are much more conscious of the secondary benefits they get from taking sides, rather than the conflict in itself, like the energy that it takes, and the consequences, basically. So yeah, it might explain like the nature of some conflicts. And yeah, I feel like there's a feeling that we must uncover there. So yeah, I open it to you guys. What do you guys feel about this? The idea of conflict, basically.
I think that like Garanville was sharing something very interesting, and I'm kind of like taking notes as we go. And well, the first question that popped in my mind was, what is it that we are seeking when we pick sides? Oh, and kind of like each of us getting clear, why is it that I stand in this side or in another one? Conflict is, and I think Jeff and Shaleia have spoken about this in one of the classes, conflict is kind of like a dialogue that is ongoing in the sense of seeking balance. Like, at least this is one of the concepts that I very recently watched in a class. We are balance seeking beings. So we talked about the sense of belonging. It's also very much deeply ingrained, like Granville was sharing from the very beginning, culturally ingrained in us. There are certain behaviors that we don't really question anymore. They've been there since the dawn of time. And we've evolved into a much richer world. We have so many more options than what was there at the beginning. So like the second question that I was coming with was, what happens when we see or meet that which is different from the side that we were kind of like taking on? And how open are we to exploring something new? In the sense, like in the context of the 21st century, like we have the internet, we have a lot of access to different information, to different points of view, way of thinking. But there, at the core, there must be something that everyone shares, something that we are all, in a sense, seeking. And so getting clear will help perhaps resolving conflict too. We all come from different walks of life, so we kind of like grew up with conflict in one way or another. I remember growing up in a Jewish family, so the Jewish factor was always there. And the conflict with Palestine was always there when, like during the 90s when I was growing up. And I never really delved very deeply into it because I was like, what, 10? Politics was not my thing. But as I grew up, I was like, there has to be something that they are unable to resolve, but maybe they are actually seeking the same. They just don't know how to communicate to each other. They kind of like cling on to what seems to be different rather than listening to what is being communicated in between the lines. At least when it comes to political or religious, that tends to be the most, what is the word that I'm looking for? Fiery conversation, if we want to put it in some term. But yeah, like that, again, like that's sense of belonging, I think it's worth cracking up. Like Granville was kind of like leading us before. So, where does it really come from? And what are we willing to back or not? Like, are we gonna hold on to this one and never let it go? Or can we see what the other party has to say and if we have a common ground?
I like what you shared then. I think it comes back to what you were sharing earlier, in the sense that even in conflict, there's a modicum of truth on every side. And you kind of need to explore those truths, no matter how small and insignificant they look in the bigger scheme of things. Because again, it's that energy of the whole exceeding the sum of the parts. If you ignore all the parts, there is no whole. All you're doing is separating the components. So yeah, I feel like there's two core energies here: the energy of belonging, but also the energy of really actually looking at the truth, looking at the snippets of truth in all of those conversations, because I feel like that's how we mediate it for ourselves, so that we get to a much more balanced view and feeling within life. So yeah, I like where we're going with this, and I feel like those two are core dots to connect. So I'm not sure who has the next piece here in terms of taking this component forward, but there is, like, I feel like there's the energy of seeking balance, and that balance is possibly looking on the inside and the outside, because those are two sides of that same coin. But then that balance is also looking at the two sides of conflict as the two sides of the same coin. And anybody that understands anything about trade and fair trade understands that a coin is not worth anything if only one side is there. So, you know, it's that thing of bringing the balance together and understanding the value in the jointness of that coin. Like, it has no trade value if it's printed blank on one side and there's almost a currency picture on the other. And if we look at it in that way, we can see that there's no value in separating those pieces of value, for lack of a better expression right now. So yeah, like, you know, that's kind of where my feeling is about it. So I want to kind of open it to everybody and say, like, you know, like, how do you feel about the fact that there can't be value in only one view? And this is why we kind of seeking the balance between the two.
For me, I guess, I don't know, what comes up for me is, when I feel into it, is like, when you pick a side, you kind of want to be right, or you want to be like, kind of what Deji said, like, you want to win, you want to have the best team, so you want to have the best opinion or the best this. And maybe when you have the mindset of like, oh, well, I just want to be right, you're kind of promoting the separation and like the disharmony, right? Because that's what picking sides is like, you're kind of like choosing separation in that area. So maybe the feeling is like arrogance, because you're not willing to look at the other point of view, or you're not willing to like feel into the other point of view. I don't know, that's just what's been coming up for me when I think about like the topics.
What came up for me as Drake said that was thinking about the 2020 election and how, we were so committed in talking about that. And there was always conversations about, Biden and Kamala, and thinking that they were the mark of the change that we are aiming for, when technically they weren't. They were a step. They were a step, but not it. They were a step in the right direction, but they weren't the goal. And obviously, there's still some arrogance in that space, in the politics space, because there are others who are choosing not to see in the vision that that they're aiming for at this time. That's what came up with me.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Drake was also sharing. Like picking sides is almost bringing more separation into a conversation where there's actually more in common than might seem at some point. Very, very deep. Yeah, maybe we have to scratch a little bit more. Because it's kind of like I keep having this dialogue come up from my childhood with all the stuff that I was hearing in the news and from my parents. And like, that's basically the dialogue that has been ongoing. It's like, I want this. Yeah, but I want this too. But for whatever reason, we are not allowing ourselves to actually share. And the same came through like all the history lessons I had at university while I was studying art. One of the questions that I always had come up was, what would have happened if the Europeans met the Americans, and instead of seeing them as something completely different, they kind of found themselves seeing in a time machine? Because that's like the tribes they found here were pretty much looking like the first social components of what then became the Europe of the 15th century and such. So for me, it's very interesting to see kind of like that gap. What can we do with that gap in between the two sides? Because that's the common ground.
So here's a question. Since and I think it's actually something that all of you have fueled as well. It's like, could all these conflicts and the energy of taking sides have an underlying core of the belief of scarcity? So we all can't have it, so I must have it. We all can't create it, so I must create it first. I must win at all costs. I must be better. So the energy of scarcity and comparison could be what's fueling the taking sides perspective.
I love that. That's a very interesting question. You have very interesting questions, Granby. Because like, yeah, it's almost as if there were like two brothers or sisters fighting over the same toys. It's like, oh, you have it, now I have to have it. And yeah, but what is it that you really want in that place? What is it that you are actually seeking for? Because at some point it stops being about the toy.
I think that's because there is always a deeper reality to everything. Not to make a toy fight really serious there, but you know, we're a spiritual being first. And all of our reality and the things that we experience come from these energies and choices that we have. So yeah, that's what came up in my mind. Also, I was kind of thinking about our tribes, which are today our family, which are a very close knit group of people compared to the past. But I was thinking about what Deb was saying and what I was experiencing as a child. And sometimes, even if you grew up with the news, there is that discourse in the family about like socially, politically, and economically, this is right. And it's not even like parents saying like, this is what we think. It's saying like, this is how it's done in the house. This is like the truth. And so I think sometimes in Take It sides, like it doesn't even occur to people that other people might have a part of the truth. And if we analyze how peace has been done ever since the end of like the 2 world wars, it's all about dialogue and coming together and not necessarily agreeing, but being at a table as equals. That's what the intellectuals in Israel and Palestine are doing, like right at this moment. Like they understood that to have like the smallest part in peace, there is at least a dialogue to be had. And I think with Russia being like not happy about like the world situation and everything, and all the other countries that are not happy with like the state of globalization right now, I think there is a call to like look at ourselves and see like, okay, all right, we believe this is our truth. We believe this is right, like this is the way it's done. But have we been controlling the dialogue? Have we been like, for the past 70 years, because it was done that way, have we been like not asking ourselves if this was right anymore? Like how it did affect like other countries, how it did affect other people. And so, yeah, I do feel it's arrogance, but I think mostly people don't really have like the spiritual tools to actually even think about what if my reality isn't like 100% right for everyone involved. So, yeah.
I do gotta say that we are on a very nice curve of learning. Just as you were speaking, Yorin, you made me remember, and I always like, we can take this with a pinch of salt, but one of the things that struck me when, or however that's pronounced, my apologies, when I was in Berlin the first time. Berlin is like a whole memorial to both the Second War and the Cold War. So you see where the wall was everywhere. And this was two opposing ideologies, capitalism, communism, fighting to see which one was better. Very roughly explained. But after the wall was torn down, and again, don't quote me on this one, one of the things that caught my attention was that 25 countries were able to sit at the table and have a conversation. And even if the intentions behind the European Union can, like, we can tap into that, we can investigate, we can dialogue, and of course discuss about it. But again, 25 countries that before that were making things rather differently to each other. We have very different cultures. The French are not the same as the Germans, are not the same as the English, although the British have claimed that when they went out, I don't know, they haven't quite made up their minds with that yet. They came together and made an agreement. And if 25 countries without the spiritual tools were able to do that, I would say that we are kind of in a very nice path. And of course, it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve. Like, we are all doing the same in our own unique way individually. But it's in this balance-seeking system that we are all in, I feel like one of the things that it's inevitable is the pursuit of union, of harmony again. Hence globalization, and a lot of people can resist it or be afraid, mostly because they are afraid of it and don't quite understand or believe that something new may override what they knew so far. But we cannot deny that we are a global civilization anymore. We are a global society. And we, at some point, will have to learn, with or without the spiritual tools, how to find that balance, how to be behind what we believe without taking credit or like discredit the other party simply because they are seeing another piece of the puzzle that we are not. And as every history process, because we are bringing economic politics, it may require some patience and some time. We are onto something very good, I believe, if we give it a space to develop. And I find it very cool that Palestine and Israel are finally, after more than 20 years, again calling for a dialogue, because they might be realizing that the way that things have been doing in the past have not really been working out so much. And there's a certain limit to what a person as part of a society can take when there's no peace at the core.
The Cold War was when Hitler and the Nazis came into power, right? I want to make sure I'm getting my information.
No, that was after.
Oh, okay. So.
Don't worry.
Because the Cold War was basically the bigger conflict between the US and the USSR, just in a nutshell. Obviously, I'm not a historian, but like just to put that in context. But and again, it was the energy of taking sides. But I think, Deb, you've touched on something that's quite important in terms of just exploring it a little bit more. And I think Yureen kind of also brought it up in terms of that desire to sit down and be open to a dialogue. And often, I mean, just in our personal lives, I've seen it play out very much differently, where people are open to being in a dialogue, into having the conversation, and to even, sometimes it requires the suspension of the conflict to hear what somebody else has to say. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to resolve a conflict by talking about the conflict and being in a space of suspending the conflict. But that is really the energy that I feel is required in terms of walking towards a resolution, whether there are spiritual tools in place or not. I also feel like it takes an energy of maturity to accept that we haven't done it correctly. And that evolution amongst governments, amongst political parties, amongst countries, amongst friends, it requires an energy of maturity and an energy of desiring to move forward together. I mean, let's be honest, we have so many examples of various wars that we can all quote, from the Arab-Israeli war to Yom Kippur, to Vietnam, to World War I, to World War II, to the Cold War. It's like everything is war, 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 war. And I think at the core, while there's still the desire to protect, for nations to protect themselves, the desire to enter into that scale of conflict has diminished. And it needs to diminish, because the fact of the matter is, as you said, we're very much a global society. We're not a national society or a tribal society. Like, we have things that affect all of us. And we can just pick one of them in the climate change issue right now, and how that is affecting in certain countries where the sea is encroaching on the land, reducing the amount of livable land. It requires significantly more open conversations to share the process of finding solutions. Like, I know, for instance, Singapore has done significant work at reclaiming land from the sea. So there's lessons learned there that can be shared. In South Africa, there's been a bit of work done in reclaiming land from the sea. So there's lessons that can be learned there. You know, and I think this is the fact that there is a significant shift from that desire to go to war, even though nations have a desire to protect themselves, starts to shift how they dialogue with everybody, how they interact with everybody. The fact that a divided land, a divided continent like Europe can come and sit around the same table and define a joint order of things across Europe, starts to say, well, yes, there is a desire for unity or union in one form or another. Might not be completely the way we as unionists envisage it right now, but we can also see a shift in our reality towards life moving in the direction of union.
And so, like, what if we took that principle that governments act like individuals? Then we would see that obviously we're not nearly close to the generation of people that experienced war, like real war. But I hope you don't hear my neighbor screaming, but whatever.
Yeah, we hear the party in the background, Yuri.
But it's so accurate to our conversation about conflict. Somebody had to represent it.
Sadly, that's not a party. He very much wants to be
Easy
heard.
year.
Whatever. So yeah, like at some point, like after a lot of resources have passed in it, a few years have passed in it, people are tired of having conflict. Like, what if you are with your twin flame? You're not, even if you fight, you're not gonna yell for a year straight. At some point, you are gonna sit down and have a dialogue. And so obviously we haven't like yet figured out how to do that. But it seems like modern peace has a really powerful thing grounding in is that like having relationships is very, very, very important. And I know some countries want to go back to war sometimes, but like most of the people on earth want peace. And I hope that they maintain that peace, and even if it's not easy, that they understand that the more they have relationship, the better it can be, even though it's uncomfortable at first, like Israel and Palestine and maybe India and Pakistan, who knows? But like, it's, since we are still in that post-war energy, I think we are still like slowly envisioning that, okay, like ignoring each other doesn't work, because we need to express we need to express our conflicts one way or another. So let's have relationships, and sometimes it's messy, but it's worth it.
So I want to flip that a little bit, and you know, it's not necessarily expressing our conflict; it's expressing our truths. And again, you know, I feel like we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is truth in every part of everybody's conversation, you know, and it's about finding that thread of truths. And so I want to share one of the comments from Shaleia, and she says, it seems from everything that you guys are sharing, what it really comes down to is the desire for union over any ego payoff. Realizing the peace and loving our brother is more valuable than anything a side can give us. We think having a side will give us connection, safety, and security, but love is what does that. And I think, you know, like, Irene, I think you touched on it quite a bit. It is the desire for relationship. And, you know, the piece that you shared right up front before you said that was, what if we treated nations or governments or the world as a complex individual? And now just take the step back and consider that even you in your individuality is complex. It kind of starts to show us the complexity of the world that we live in. But that complexity should never, for me, it doesn't feel like complexity should be debilitating. Like, we find our upset, we heal our upset, we move on to the next upset. There's a cycle. And I feel like this is something that is being reflected to us in the world. There was a cycle of significant conflicts, and on the other side of it, there's a cycle of fatigue. There's a cycle of a desire to be more connected. There's also a very much more connected world that we live in. It's just, it's evolved to that extent, realizing our connection to each other. We can be in any place in the world and literally be sitting in this conversation right now. You know, that is where we're at. And who's to say in another few years that conversation can't happen in person, because, hey, we are able to project ourselves into those places. So, you know, there's all these shifts. There's all these shifts that enable us to build that connection. And so even within ourselves, there's shifts that we desire a deeper connection within ourselves. And it's just reflected in what's happening in the collective. There is a shift. There's a desire to have a stronger relationship with yourself. That is reflected in your reality, in seeing how there's a desire amongst nations and governments to have stronger relationships with each other.
I was asking a question that fits exactly in this. he said, I wonder if the reason why we don't have a lot of war now is because social media has made us a global community where relationships and communications, well, connections, go outside of cultures and countries. And so to rephrase what you were saying, like it's basically, I think it's just a reflection of the desire, the deep desire to connect and to reconnect and have relationships and be open, I guess. And social media is a perfect tool to that. I guess it's both the cause and the consequence of that desire. And yeah, I don't think people are looking past their cultures and countries, although maybe yes, sometimes. I think they're ready. They have that small desire for union. Maybe they don't even realize it, but that's how we came to be as a community. If there wasn't like the global desire for union, I think it wouldn't be there. So yeah, I very much think it's like global energies help us go forward in the world, whether with peace or new technology, as human beings in relationships. We're defining the way we see things, like slowly but surely, because of first having these desires inside us.
Yeah, and it's the deepest and oldest desire of all, in truth. Again, going back to my lessons in history, that's how the human being started exploring the world, and we came after thousands of years to what we now have. It was like, I cannot be the only thing, like I have to be connected to something else. And that kind of like knowing without knowing. And kind of like I wanted to go back a little bit to this resolving conflict, and how is it that though a lot of countries are still using the card of war to resolve whatever conflict they have, the most of the countries who have chosen to do everything possible to prevent this from being the next step are the ones who already went through the experience, and they already know what happens when a disagreement, because a conflict is a disagreement at the core, escalates to such an extent. And once you go through that experience and you see the consequences, you don't really want to be going back to that. But like it's in our own journey. Sometimes we have to strike certain level of contrast until we get really clear that this is not what I want anymore, and make a different choice. So certain countries have gone to that point. Some others are on the way to that. It all depends also in how old they are, because again, countries are like people, they grow old, they go through certain phases, like psychologically speaking. This is a topic perhaps for another call, and it's something that I always was interested in investigating, but I haven't really gone that deep yet. But there is a psychology factor to how we as individuals, and of course societies are made of individuals, so there is again like that correlation on how we function and move forward and grow in this place, even in our points of view as well. So there are moments where it's very useful to see, okay, how young or how old the country is and why they are at the stage they are at. And of course, sometimes the oldest countries are kind of like a parent trying to tell you that, no, this is not the way, there's a better one. And we can choose to hear or not, depending on how rebel we are. But yeah, like we are working towards something. here, and let's see how it unfolds. But that desire that you were touching upon, Yorin, has been there all along, and it has never gone anywhere. Perhaps as a civilization, we lack the tools. Like we see kids resolve conflict not very much from dialogue, because a lot of times they lack the tools to have a mature dialogue, so they fight. It is only when somebody with a little bit more maturity comes into the scene that they can kind of like decompress the disagreement, the conflict, and show a better way. But there are people who already have this piece. And the best thing that we can do is perhaps pay attention and listen and learn from them. Like Granville was saying, there are lessons learned from these different experiences. And certain countries are already applying solutions that do not require having to go to the battlefield and kill the neighbor for a little piece of land. Very bluntly said.
Yeah, I like that. And I think you've touched on a very important point, and it's probably something that would be good to wrap up our conversation on, in terms of the evolution of national consciousness. And you've touched it. You touched it perfectly in the fact that as human beings, we go through a psychological shift every 7 years. It's a cycle of learning, it's a cycle of growth. And so, again, as you said, our nations, our world shifts along those lines as well. We might not always see it as much if we're not paying attention. But I feel like one of the things is that we do need to pay attention. The other thing is that, you don't need to learn a bad lesson to know that something is bad. You can actually just learn the lesson from somebody else sharing with you, actually, this is bad, don't do it. You don't have to call in contrast to grow. It's one of those things. And I feel like it's very important for us to ground in the space of, if we are connected, and we're prepared to learn for each other and from each other, we don't have to repeat lessons of the past. That line in common language that says history repeats itself. Is it really necessary? Are we not perpetuating then a cycle of pain where we should be trying to transcend it? So again, the question is, as our world shifts and we have learned that there's not always benefit to taking sides, do we really need to learn the lesson again that the benefit of taking sides is probably minimal to the benefits of actually working together and moving forward together? So I'm going to leave that question there. And I'm going to say thank you to everybody for our conversation today. I feel like we delved quite a bit into our topic. Yes, we are not going to completely resolve everything in one dialogue, but just creating the awareness creates the conditions for a shift. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody for the conversation. I'm going to say thank you to everybody that's joined us in comments today. We appreciate the comments and the questions. We also would like to invite you to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous discussions in what was the Black Lives Matter conversation and has now evolved into our Seeking Harmony conversation. We'd also like to invite you to like and subscribe to our Twin Flames Universe YouTube channel, where you'll find lots of Twin Flame content to help you on your Ascension journey. And we look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.